So basically, I just want to talk about how I started and how I finished my dissertation, and by using my own work as an example. So I focus on the effects of explicit form-focused instruction on L2 speaking development. Okay. I recently, quite recently finished of my dissertation, so I thought this is still a good opportunity to share what I went through while I still have the vivid memories. Okay. So I'll start by introducing my brief background, how or when I started the program, how I selected my topic, how I made my research questions, how I designed my study, how I collected my data, how I analyzed some of my data, and some of the preliminary analysis that I conducted. Because we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, I'm limited to only about 40 minutes. I will choose some of the more interesting results to share with you, and some findings, some implications, and where to go from here. So I was born in Taiwan, and I migrated to Australia when I was 10, many years ago. I won't tell you how many. I came to Japan for a Japanese exchange program. I liked Japan so much that I decided to go to graduate school in Japan. Okay. And then after I finished graduate school, I started working in Japan, and my first position was in Nagoya. Okay, I'll share with you shortly. Okay, I started my PhD program in 2012, and then after that, I took a break. I resigned from Japan. I went back to Australia. I call it the dissertation writing / retirement. And then 2 years ago, I came back to Japan to teach again. So this is now my second working life in Japan. Okay, so this is dissertation writing in Australia, how I spend most of my time. That's why it took so long as well. Okay, so I went to graduate school at Kyoto University, and I did something that is something similar to TESOL, but the name is slightly different. I looked at education for foreign languages. Then after that, I started working for a famous company in Nagoya, and I only lasted 1 year before I decided that that's not meant for me. Okay? I started teaching. You can see that I have worked at a number of departments, different schools, but you can also probably see that most of my previous positions were contract positions. Okay, so one of the reasons why I started PhD basically was for a practical reason, is I wanted to give myself the other opportunity. Okay, so when I was still teaching previously back at Kyoto University, I enrolled myself at Temple University, Osaka campus. Okay, I'm not promoting Temple anything, but I'll share with you some of the stories, okay, that I went through. Oh, sorry about that. So how to select a good research topic, okay, for those of you who are currently or actively doing research, it's probably quite easy. But for people who haven't done research for a while, or for people who are now planning to start their study, okay, choosing a research topic, choosing a field can be quite difficult. Usually it's related to your personal interest. And a lot of time, if you're a teacher, if you're a practicing teacher, it also relates to what you do in your own classrooms. It also can be related to what you read, okay? And it can also be related to your previous degree, okay? If you have conducted some research in your previous MA degree, okay? In my case, at the doctor program I went through, I did 3 years of coursework, okay? So that I took a lot of courses taught by basically different researchers in different fields, so that I had the opportunity to learn a lot of different topics. Then how to like a good topic, okay? Usually is to look out to what has been conducted already, what hasn't been achieved, and then to try to look for the gap. Okay, so what is the field currently lacking? And obviously, before I started my doctoral program, I didn't know much. Even after doing the coursework, I didn't know that much. So a lot of time is really to read literature, okay, to see that a lot of time they identified limitations or problems that they were unable to achieve in their work. Okay, and that a lot of cases they have also suggested research implications. And other options is really to ask people, ask your supervisors, they have been in the field for so long, ask other researchers, for example, at workshops, at conferences. Okay, look for trends in the latest publications in the major journals. If you see that each volume kind of has its kind of own focus, you can kind of see, if you read a few volumes of the journal, you kind of know that where the trend is going. Okay, and lastly, be practical, be ambitious, but please don't be too ambitious, otherwise you might never finish. So how did I decide on my research topic? Okay, of course, I read a lot of papers, and I also asked my supervisors. I asked, what is a topic that is very publishable? In other words, that 10 or 20 years down the track, I can still be strong in my research. They say speaking research. Okay, the reason is because speaking research is very time consuming. Okay, it's very controversial. Okay, and that's why it hasn't been conducted as much. So that was the first reason why I chose speaking. The second reason is because of the continuous interest in speaking research. It also to do with what I do in my classes. I used to teach a lot of academic writing classes, and I feel that after one semester of classes, students tend to be quite good after one semester of classes, but even the very strong writers cannot say things, okay, in English. So that the learners continue struggle with speaking, okay, in the EFL context, okay, and I do a lot of tasks in my own classrooms, and I found that although students become more fluent, okay, in other words, they appear to be more proficient after completing the tasks, but they still make some sometimes very basic grammatical mistakes. Okay, so in the field of speaking proficiency development, there is a lack of evidence of accuracy gains from doing tasks, and I feel that, okay, that this is probably what I want to focus on. Okay, so I look at the effect of explicit form-focused instruction in meaning context. So basically try to integrate form-focused instruction into task-based activities. Next, making the research questions. So usually people ask me, what research questions do you make? How many research questions you make? Okay. So it really depends on what you want to find out. And there is no magic number of how many research questions are needed. I've seen dissertations with 3 research questions, with 5 research questions, 8, with more. But don't forget that in a lot of cases, the research question would subdivide into further sub-research questions, so that you might end up with a lot of research questions. Okay, and also something to remember is that a research question is not a research hypothesis. Okay, so that before we do anything, when we make the research questions, we really have to have an hypothesis of what we think the results would be. Okay, and to do that, how do we do that? Is by reading a lot of literature. Okay, that's for my case anyway. Okay. So I had 5 research questions in my dissertation work. First is, does speaking proficiency improve after a period of time? Okay, doing repetitive tasks, speaking tasks. Okay, And research question 2 is, does FF1, FFI, the form focus instruction, develop more speaking proficiency? Okay. And question 3 is, how does this speaking proficiency develop over time? So looking at the trajectory of changes, how learners speaking change and develop over time. Question 4, okay, what effect does form focused instruction learner affect, such as how they feel, their speaking anxiety, how their speaking efficacy, how their desire to speak. And finally, the teacher's evaluation of speaking proficiency is always different from learners' self-assessment. Okay, so that what effect does form-focused instruction have on learners' own self-assessment? So these were the 5 research questions that I looked at in my work. So next is the research design, okay? And in my own case, if I could go back in time, I wish I spent a little bit more time, okay, doing more reading before I design my study. There is no perfect study, but there are a lot of faults that we could avoid, okay? And that in my particular study, I had about 100 participants, and I divided into 3 groups. So basically, I had a control group, okay, the comparison group, and then I had 2 intervention groups where I gave them different amounts of intervention of form-focused instruction. Okay, intervention group 1, I gave them grammar instruction. Okay, I will explain a little bit more later, and then intervention group number 2, I gave them form focus instruction, grammar instruction, plus peer feedback. Okay. So I had a practice week where I trained them how to use the devices and how to become familiar with the concept of narration. Then I did a pre-test, 7 weeks of intervention, and then a post-test. And then for my questions, research questions 4 and 5, where I wanted to find out how students feel, okay, from the effects of form-focused instruction, I also gave surveys after the pre-test and also after the post-test. So table 1 kind of summarize the interventions I gave to my participants. Okay, comparison group, usually it's called, sometimes it's called a control group. I call it a comparison group because in my case, participants in this particular group also did weekly tasks. So, which means they did something, not nothing. So therefore they are considered to be comparison instead of control group. The first intervention group received Blackboard grammar explanation. I used a grammar textbook, and that I focus on past tense usage. Okay, why did I choose past tense usage? Is because that even very advanced learners make very careless mistakes with past tense usage. Okay, and also I have spoken to other colleagues and researchers that they feel this is the area that needs to be looked at. So then for my stronger amount of intervention, I gave them both the grammar and explanation plus peer feedback, where they gave feedback to each other's narration. Okay. So this is the cartoon narration that I used in the pre-test, in the post-test, and then throughout the 7 weeks of intervention, all the participants did a different cartoon narration every week. This particular level is from the ACAN pre-level 1 speaking task. Okay, I'll play a little bit of one of
One day, a woman was watching a TV program. TV program showed human population was destroying its habitat. And sea sat and seafield sat and sea sinked. She thought what she could do for.
Okay. So this is what I did in the pre-test and in the post-test. Okay, and I used the same manga for this. Okay, and then throughout the intervention weeks, I gave them a different cartoon narration each week. Okay, and that the intervention groups receive their interventions respectively before they did their cartoon narration. So by doing this, I wanted to know if my interventions would have an effect on the experimental groups. Okay. So in the program I went through, we had to do a proposal defense to kind of propose what we want to research before we were given the okay and to move on with actual data collection. Okay. So before I did my research proposal defense, I did some pilot studies, basically try to become familiar with the data collection process, with the data transcription process, and whether or not that my instrument actually works, so that in several smaller pilot studies, I tested this out. And then in September 2015, about 3 years after I started my program, I defended my proposal. Okay. At this stage, my dissertation manuscript only included 3 sections, roughly just very brief introduction, literature review, and then also a method of how I'm going to actually conduct my research. Okay. If I could go back in time again, I think I would probably not have rushed this process to read more, to talk to more people before I did my data collection. Because once you collected your data, you can't go back. So I collected all the data from my own classes. I was teaching 5 classes of the same year level. I was quite lucky that they approved my request to have those classes in the core classrooms, so that all the students had a computer where they recorded themselves. Okay, the data collection period lasted for about 9 weeks, so 7 weeks of intervention plus pre and post test recordings. So students recorded themselves individually, okay, on the PC, and then I collected their audio recordings, okay, from all the participants each week. Okay, there were a lot of issues, mostly with technical issues, because with computers, everything breaks down sometimes. Okay, so that some students were having problem with recording, some students were having problem with submitting their files. So if you ever consider doing a speaking related research involving a large number of participants, I would really recommend that you get a TA or get someone to help at least with the data collection days. So for me, it was a very stressful 9 weeks, because every week I was worried about what's going to happen if something goes wrong, and that a lot of cases things did went wrong. Okay, so, and there were also problems with student absentees. Some students were, sometimes didn't come to class, therefore that those students had to be deleted from the sample. With the questionnaires that I delivered, it was very easy. Okay, basically, I give out the questionnaires using SurveyMonkey, and I asked the students to fill in the questionnaires in class after the pre and post test. Okay, Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the data transcription, transcribing the audio files into text files. And this was once again very stressful and very time consuming. Okay, so I had about 100 participants, pre-test, post-test, so that's about 200 files. Plus, I also look at some participants' changes throughout their weeks, so that probably another additional about 60, 70 audio files. So I transcribed it, most of the files myself, and it took about 6 months. Okay, it was very time consuming because a lot of times I had to go back and do it again because I wasn't very precise with my measurements. Depending on what I want to measure, I think the method of transcription is also different. If I wanted to look at some particular details, then maybe my transcription needs to be more detailed as well. Okay, so I would recommend if people want to transcribe their audio data before they start, do some practice, do some training so that there is consistency. Okay, and also if you want to ask some people to transcribe some of your data, or if you're going to pay someone, and make sure you have very clear guidelines for them as well. This is an example of one file I transcribed. You can see maybe why it took me some time is that I not only transcribed the content, I also try to, as much as possible, I transcribe them naturally. So it included a lot of repairs, it included a lot of reconstructions, it included repetitions, it could include also a lot of failures as well. Okay, and a lot of these words or partial words I highlighted in red, I had to clean them before I do the analysis. So also, once again, depending on what analysis you want to do, you will also have to clean the data differently. Okay. So for the measurement of the actual speaking proficiency, I use the very common CAF measurements, complexity, accuracy, and fluency. And that if you are familiar with the CAF literature, you'll know that there are many, many, many measurements out there. Okay, so then the next comes a question of how many measurements is a good number. Okay, how many ways do I need to measure my data so that I could get the most precise results I want. Okay, once again, there is no key number. Okay, a lot of people think, okay, if I choose 3 measurements for each construct, I might be okay. Then why 6? Why not 9? Why not 12? Or kind of etc. etc. Okay, more is not better, but if you only have 1 measurement, you're probably limiting yourself. Okay, so if you have many measurements for each construct, then you might be in the risk of overlaps, which means that you might be measuring the same thing. Okay, so for my complexity, I look at mean length for T unit. Okay, so T unit is it's kind of like a sentence. If for those who are not familiar with a T unit usage, kind of like sentence, but a sentence can include 1 T unit or 2 T units or 1 T unit and several clauses. Okay, I also look at clauses per T unit ratio. Okay. For accuracy, I look at global accuracy, which is a percentage of error-free T units. So which means I counted the number of T units in one participant output. Okay. And then I counted how many are accurate, and I compare that to how many are inaccurate, and I work out a percentage. Okay, percentage of accurate past tense verb usage, because my focus was the usage of past tense. I look at students' usage of simple past, past continuous, past perfect. I look at oral fluency, speech rate. This is probably the easiest measurement to do because there are a lot of online automatic counters, or basically you just have to enter the script, and then it will give you the number of syllables produced. Okay. Self-repair, once again, you have to do this manually, count maybe the number of partial words, the number of reconstructed words, the number of repetitions, etc., etc. So this measurement, this analysis also took some time. So for people who are familiar with speaking research, one of the biggest argument is that the lack of human raters, okay, because even the CAF measurement of complexity, accuracy, and fluency, it doesn't really describe our human speech. So that one of the biggest argument is that with any speaking research, you really have to add human raters so that they either rate the participant either holistically or analytically. Okay, in this case, I use 3 raters, including myself, and I did some cross-rating with overlaps, which means that to make sure that we rated the participants nicely, we kind of evaluated, we kind of rated about 45, 50 participants each, so that each rater overrated some participants. We did some rater training. We use very clear criteria. I'll show you the criteria we use later. The criteria scale is I modified from Nita and Takasahara in 2014. Okay, it's a very kind of a difficult to see scale, basically rating of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest for each complexity, accuracy, and fluency construct. I'll show you a kind of a enlarged version of the scale. Okay, because my focus is accuracy, I'll show you the accuracy scale. So scale 1, there are a lot of errors. 2, they can manage most common forms. 3, limited linguistic control. 4, clear lack. And 5, no linguistic control. Okay, I'm sorry, the scale is other way around. Other way around, please. Okay, my mistake. Okay, now going on to some preliminary analysis of the survey data. Okay, when using any survey, we have to do, first of all, some cleaning of the data before we start any analysis, basically to see if there is any missing data. Okay, so if I'm interested to see pre-test and post-test survey participant who only did 1 and not the other, those participant had to be pulled out from the sample. Okay, dummy data participant that answered all 6s, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Those participants probably considered as dummies and they can't be used. So once I collected the survey data, I went through to see if there's any missing data and any dummy data. After I did that, then I conducted rush analysis, okay, which is using a software called Winstep. Okay, so basically, in one of the 2 surveys I conducted, I wanted to see if there were changes in student speaking anxiety, speaking efficacy, desire to speak. And for each of these latent constructs, I prepared a number of items. So for example, looking at construct number 1, speaking anxiety. In order to measure speaking anxiety, I prepared 16 items based on previous literature. Try to measure this construct of speaking anxiety. But how do I know that the items I prepared really measured speaking anxiety? Okay, how do I know that a participant really answered them properly? Okay, that's why I use rush analysis. Okay, basically using the rush analysis, you could pull out all the participants. Okay, all the items that didn't fit properly. Okay, so that I deleted them. Okay. So, and also one of the kind of the really good things about rational analysis is it could kind of justify if the survey, okay, was kind of designed properly. So for example, in my particular survey, I use a scale of 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But how do we know that the distance between 1 and 2 strongly disagree is equivalent to the distance between 2 and 3 disagree and slightly disagree? These distances, these intervals are probably not the same. Okay, so by doing rational analysis, we try to test that these intervals, okay, are the same or not. So this is one of the first steps of doing the rational analysis, is that we want to see how many responses are for each scale. So if you look at this, the scales 1 to 6, it says that most of the participants responded, okay, 3 and 4, which is quite expected, okay, and that only some participants, okay, responded to 6, strongly agree, and also only some responded to strongly disagree. Okay, this is once again also expected. Okay, so the numbers here actually look quite nice, but there are some minimum requirements that I will need to clear before I could use the data of the survey. Okay, one of the first requirements is that all the scales would have to have at least 10 responses. So in other words, okay, if there are only less than 10 responses for 6 strongly agree, that means that this scale is probably not measuring what it's supposed to measure. Okay, in that case, I might have to reformat this scale again, so that a Likert scale of 1 to 6 will not work for this particular group of participants. Okay. There are also other criteria I have to measure, so that with Winstead, with Rasch models, they use logits. Logits basically a scale of how one number is relative to another number on kind of a scale. So for example, the output logit needs to be under 2. In this case, everything's under 2, okay, cleared. I also have to look at the separation between the scales, that they need to be, the separation needs to be under, say, 0.59. In this case, I've cleared the basic requirement. So at this stage, I can say yes, that at this stage number 1, the data I collected from the survey is probably reliable. Okay. Then move on to kind of further analysis of Rasch analysis. Okay, so basically at this stage, it has, for this particular latent construct, I prepare 16 items. Okay, I want to see if there are some items not measuring what it's supposed to measure. Okay, and then once again, there are some criteria recommended by textbook. So at this stage, I found that one item didn't fulfill the criteria, so I deleted that item from the sample. So this is called a map. Basically, it kind of arrange all the items in a kind of scale of spectrum, okay? So that the items on the top, okay, will be more difficult to answer by the participant. And that, it says here, classmates will laugh at me, okay, in group discussions, okay? Strongly agree or strongly disagree, okay? Whereas the last item on the scale, the items on the top, the items on at the bottom are easier to answer by the participants, this particular group of participants. Okay, so I did this kind of validation to make sure that the data I collected from my survey, okay, really measured what I really wanted to measure. It's called and the software I use is called Instep. Okay. Now I'm going to look at some of my research questions and results, but because time is slightly running against the time, I will skip some of the research questions and I'll move on to the more interesting results. Okay. So does phone-focused instruction develop speaking proficiency in learners? Okay, so after I collected the audio files, after they were transcribed, after I counted the measurements, I had 6 calf measurements. Then I fed the numbers into SPSS and I conducted something called MANOVA. Okay, so basically I want to know if the effect of phone-focused instruction, if phone-focused instruction has effect on these 6 measurements. Okay, and I conduct MANOVA, and then yes, there were some significance. Then I continue with my next step of analysis, which is I conducted 6 individual ANOVA analysis for each of the 6 measurements. Okay. So I'm gonna rush a little bit here, but hang on, let's see. Okay. So basically, I have 3 groups, okay, and they did pre-test, they did post-test, okay. I collected that, I work out the difference, okay. At that stage, okay, even if I just calculate the mean, okay, there are some sort of differences, okay. But I want to know if the differences between the 3 groups is significant or not, okay. That's why I use the ANOVA analysis. So the results were quite promising, okay. Among the 6 calf measurements I conducted, okay, I found 2 significant differences, okay, in my accuracy measurements, okay, which is the percentage of error-free T units. This is one of my accuracy measurements. Second, I found there's a difference in the percentage of accurate past verb usage. Okay, this is my second accuracy measurement. And then after I found that there was a significant difference, then my next step is I then continued and I tried to look where was the difference. Was the difference between my comparison group and my first FFI intervention group, or was the difference between my comparison group and my second stronger FFI plus peer feedback group? Okay, you can see here that the next step of analysis said that both intervention groups, okay, improve more than the comparison group, which is great. But it didn't tell me if more intervention is more effective than less intervention. Okay. Okay. So I'll show you a little bit of the week-to-week differences, because personally I found it's quite interesting. So to see the week-to-week changes in the participant, I chose 9 participants. Okay, I chose this 9 participant based on their performance. I basically chose the average participant from each group, because if I chose the very top performing participant, the way they improve is probably different from participants who are not improving as much. So I chose 3 representative participants from each group, and I compare their differences week to week. So these are the changes in the participants throughout the weeks. It's a little bit messy, but you can see that there are some changes. Okay, this table kind of will make easier to kind of comprehend the differences. So basically my focus was grammatical accuracy. I want to know if there will be differences in grammatical accuracy. Okay. So looking at this, you can see that that both the FFI and the FFI ×2 groups outperform the comparison group. If you have a look, week 3 that I highlighted in red. Okay. But if you probably, if you have a look, week 3, the participant in the stronger intervention group probably perform better than participants in the FFI group. But then if you look at the very, very bottom, say the final week, maybe there are no such differences. So that probably they kind of suggest that maybe by giving learners more intervention of form-focused instruction, maybe that will speed up their grammatical accuracy development until that effect fades off after a certain point of time. Maybe a ceiling effect. Okay. I'm gonna jump this and I'm gonna move on to my interpretations. So form-focused instruction was effective for developing grammatical accuracy, but the effects were not long-lasting. Okay, it fades off as weeks pass, and one of the reasons, as I suggested, maybe because those participants have reached ceiling effect. The usage of passing usage is really not that difficult for the learners. So I'm going to skip research question 4 and 5, and I'm going to go on to my conclusions. Limitations in research. So limitations, there I listed a few limitations, but my list could actually go on forever. There are so many things that I wish I have done, but I didn't do. Okay? Some of the limitations probably include I should have considered different proficiency levels. I didn't do that. I should have divided the participant into maybe 3 groups: high proficiency, low proficiency, maybe intermediate proficiency. Okay, I only look at past simple form because the other forms kind of got too complicated. I can explain a little bit more if you're interested. I didn't have enough qualitative analysis. And that I lack the learner voices. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Conclusion of my research: form-focused instruction, explicit grammar explanation is effective for developing accuracy. Okay. However, more instruction is not necessarily more effective. Okay. They were week-to-week changes. Okay. So to sum up, suitable amount of form-focused instruction, okay, is probably ideal and can be integrated into meaning-focused, communication-based classrooms. So this is now come to the very end of my presentation today. Okay. So my short, long journey of dissertation research writing. What I learned a lot. It took me a long time, but I also learned how to learn more, and I also learned how much I don't know yet. It's worth the time and effort, and I think this is it. Thanks very much.